If you're hoping for solid fantasy numbers from your quarterback this week, well, you're in luck. We've got quite a few favorable matchups for some good quarterbacks this week, and we've got quite a few guys that are fringe starts because they also have a really solid opportunity. This could end up being a great week for quarterbacks. Now, we don't get started with the best matchup on Thursday Night Football, but Kirk Cousins for me is going to have to be a sit this week. I know it's an enticing matchup. Tampa Bay allows the 5th most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, but since Kirk Cousins took over for Michael Penix after his injury, he has 3 touchdowns and 3 interceptions, and he's only thrown for more than 200 yards one time. So as of right now, with a lot of really solid matchups this week, I don't think Kirk Cousins is one that we need to risk it with. I can only give Baker Mayfield the fringe start designation this week. He just has not been good enough as of recent. When you take a look at his recent numbers, he only has 1 touchdown in each of his last 4 games. So we're not finding a ton of upside. On top of that, he has 4 interceptions during that stretch as well. He may still be banged up, whatever reason it is. Baker Mayfield, unfortunately, just has not had the upside that we've needed from him over the last few games. For Cleveland and Chicago, Shedeur Sanders will find himself as a fringe option this week. I would much rather use him in a 2 quarterback or a super flex league instead of a 1 QB league. But going up against Chicago, who allows the 9th most fantasy points per game, coming off of a matchup in which he was the quarterback 2 in the snow last week, going up against Chicago, he could end up having a solid floor as well. I was very, very close to listing Caleb Williams as a sit this week, but something in my gut said, Kyle, that's going to backfire on you, but I do not love his upside. First and foremost, it is a tough matchup. Going up against Cleveland, they allow the 4th fewest fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. And we've still seen some up and down performances from Caleb Williams. He still misses a few too many throws. He still makes some decisions that don't seem like that they were the best. But for Caleb Williams this week, I would much rather start him in a 2 quarterback or a super flex league, similar to what I just said about Shedeur Sanders. If you're in a 1 QB league where you're only playing like 12 quarterbacks total, maybe a 14-team league, Caleb Williams may not be on my radar this week. Baltimore at Cincinnati could end up being the best quarterback matchup of the week. Lamar Jackson has struggled, but towards the end of last week's game, he started to look like he was playing a little bit better, and hopefully that rust is gone. And this week against Cincinnati, who allows the 3rd most fantasy points per game, Lamar Jackson can come out and have a huge day. Joe Burrow is obviously going to be a start as well, since he has returned from his injury, 260 or more passing yards, 6 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. This is exactly the type of matchup where Lamar Jackson and Joe Burrow both need to shine. Justin Herbert turned out a gutty performance last week against Philadelphia, but his matchup on the road this week against Kansas City could be just as, if not a little bit more tough. The left hand doesn't seem to be bothering him all that much, so I still think Justin Herbert should give us a solid floor on most weeks. This week, though, I don't expect that high of a ceiling, and one of the reasons why I have to list him as a fringe start. I think him finishing more towards like QB 16 is quite possible than like quarterback 12. And for Patrick Mahomes, things were as bad as they could get for Mahomes last week. Probably one of his worst career games. And the Chargers are very good. 2nd fewest fantasy points per game allowed to opposing quarterbacks. Picked off Jalen Hurts 4 times last week, and ultimately really did a great job of limiting the upside for the Philadelphia Eagles. This week against Patrick Mahomes, he could also end up having a really tough time and maybe even throw a couple of interceptions. However, back in week 1 when they opened the season against each other, Patrick Mahomes was the quarterback 6. I don't expect that type of upside, but being right around QB 12 in a game that they absolutely have to win, hopefully he can get it done for fantasy owners. Buffalo at New England, and we've got a couple of MVP candidates battling it out at the quarterback position this week, and hopefully this one is just as good of a matchup at the quarterback position as what we hope Lamar and Joe Burrow will end up being. Obviously with Josh Allen, he's firmly in the MVP race once again, and he has had some outstanding weeks over the last few weeks, carrying this team on his back, and now they have a really tough matchup on the road going up against New England. Drake May's not going to have an easy task in front of him either. Also an MVP candidate, Buffalo is allowing the 5th fewest fantasy points per game, so they're going to put him to the test. But for Drake May, he's passed that test quite a bit so far this season. When they played Buffalo back earlier in the season, Drake Maye did not throw any touchdowns, but he also didn't have any interceptions, and he threw for 273 yards. So I think we could expect around 250 yards this week, but he's also playing a lot better right now than he was at that point in time too. So Drake Maye could end up finding the end zone as well. Jayden Daniels officially ruled out, so we're not going to get the Jayden Daniels Jackson Dart matchup that I would absolutely love to see. But Marcus Mariota is going to be a very popular streaming option this week, going up against the Giants, who allow the second most fantasy points per game. I'm not willing to list him as a must start, and he's going to be a fringe like several other quarterbacks in this video. But with Marcus Mariota, he's going to be much closer to being a start in one quarterback leagues than a lot of the other fringe options because of how good of a matchup it is, because his team is healthy around him with Terry McLaurin, and now that I say that, I realize Zach Ertz is done for the season, but his wide receivers are healthy. Terry McLaurin, Deebo Samuel. Maybe we'll see Ben Sinnott get a little bit involved this week. Whatever it may be, Marcus Mariota is going to be fringe. He's top 15 as of right now for me. So if you're in a 1 QB league that a lot of quarterbacks were taken and you're scrambling, or even a 14-team league and you're scrambling for a quarterback, out of the guys out there on the waiver wire, Marcus Mariota has to probably be one of the best bets. And 2 quarterbacks in super flex leagues, he's absolutely a start this week. Jackson Dart, absolutely a must start for me this week. Number one, coming out of the bye, they've had over a week to game plan for this Washington team. Number two, Washington allows the 4th most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. And the best part about this, maybe from some people's perspective, is the fact that he's still not afraid to run the football. He's just got to learn maybe get out of bounds a little bit quicker, slide a little bit sooner, but he's not afraid to go out there and run. And like he said last week, he's going to keep doing it. So the upside for his rushing ability still remains, and it's a great passing potential game as well. Before I move into the next matchup though, if you're looking for an awesome Christmas gift for the golfer in your life, then I encourage you to check out our friends over at Caddy Splash. Caddy Splash has great tools for every type of golfer. Maybe you're a scratch golfer. Maybe you're the type of golfer like me where you just try to at least look good when you head out there, even if your swing doesn't. And Caddy Splash helps me do exactly that. Being able to use their tools to keep my golf clubs clean definitely helped me look a whole lot better on the golf course, so when people laugh, they're only laughing at my swing. And right now, if you use code Headliners15 over at Caddy Splash at checkout, you're gonna get 15% off of your entire order. And like I said, these are great stocking stuffers and Christmas gifts for anybody in your life that loves to hit the links. So check out Caddy Splash, and if there's anything over there, use code Headliners15 at checkout to get your discount. Las Vegas at Philadelphia. Geno Smith is questionable. Kenny Pickett is a sit. If we have to have a conversation at this point in the season about whether or not we should start Kenny Pickett or Geno Smith, you're in a terribly deep league and your season's already over. I know Jalen Hurts screwed a lot of people over last week. 5 turnovers, including 2 on the same play, absolutely killed fantasy seasons all over the place. But this is the perfect matchup to bounce back. That Chargers defense is not easy, and now Philadelphia is at home against a much better defense that offers tremendous upside. So Jalen Hurts is going to be an easy start for me this week. If you don't trust him, you don't trust him. But I highly doubt there's any fantasy owners out there that are seriously considering sitting Jalen Hurts right now. The Jets against Jacksonville, and as of right now, there is no word on who the starting quarterback will be for the New York Jets. If for some reason Justin Fields were to start, I would put him as a fringe start just because it is a solid matchup, and being able to use his feet a little bit could present a decent floor. If they do decide to go with Brady Cook though, he's going to be a sit. I don't care how good the matchup is. After having 6 interceptions in 4 games, Trevor Lawrence has 0 interceptions over the last 2 games, and he now has multiple passing touchdowns in the last 3 games. That is much better. That is what I want to see. Do not turn the ball over. The less you turn the ball over, the more upside and the better floor that you present at the quarterback position. This week, Trevor Lawrence going up against the New York Jets. Hopefully, for a team that hasn't caused a whole lot of turnovers, Trevor Lawrence can keep on pace and finish inside the top 12. Jacoby Brissett has been an absolute godsend for those of you that had Kyler Murray or Joe Burrow or one of the other quarterbacks that ended up getting hurt and you needed to pick somebody off the waiver wire. Jacoby Brissett ended up giving you some great fantasy performances. But this is the first time in several weeks that I've looked at Jacoby Brissett and thought to myself, I would much rather leave him on the bench unless I absolutely have to play him. He's been so good, I have to list him as a fringe start. But going up against Houston, who allowed the fewest fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks and treated Patrick Mahomes like a rag doll last week on the road, Jacoby Brissett to me, unfortunately, this week does not present a ton of upside. I think CJ Stroud has an okay floor right now, but he doesn't really have that great of a ceiling. He doesn't have the type of ceiling that would say, hey, we want to start CJ Stroud on a regular basis. And he may never get back to being that quarterback we saw his rookie year. Now, he could, if the Texans decide to fix up the offensive line finally, which I think they will do this offseason. So for me, when I take a look at what CJ Stroud can do, he's going to be fringe, mainly because as a 2 QB or a super flex league QB, he could end up being just fine in your lineup. And a 1 QB league, though, we need to be looking for other options. Green Bay and Denver has a couple of quarterbacks that have the potential for upside and have shown upside at times, but probably will not have the upside this week. At least for Jordan Love, he played really well last week, and he's played very well at times this season. But finding that type of upside going up against Denver, who's currently allowing the 6th fewest fantasy points per game, I just don't love his upside this week. And for Bo Nix, he's going into a matchup against Green Bay allowing the 7th fewest fantasy points per game. But Bo Nix has been struggling tremendously as of late and has not had the type of upside that you would like to see from a guy that showed a lot of upside last season. For the third time in just under 2 years, the Rams and the Lions are going to face off, except the Lions have to head to LA this time. Jared Goff is going to present a solid floor, but the Rams defense allowing the 10th fewest fantasy points per game are going to give him trouble. This is another matchup where I'm thinking maybe he throws for like 220 yards, maybe a couple of touchdowns, turns the ball over once. It's one of those matchups where I think you're going to have some frustrations, but by the end of it, you're going to be like, it was an okay game. Matthew Stafford, on the other hand, could end up blowing up and being the QB1 this week. After 2 back-to-back losses to the Detroit Lions in Detroit, Stafford, I think, is going to want to take advantage of this one. Detroit's secondary is absolutely depleted. Right now, they're allowing the 6th most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. They finally got some pressure last week getting after Dak Prescott, but I think Matthew Stafford's going to be a little bit tougher to get after this week, and I think he has QB1 upside against this Lions team. Bryce Young has shown just enough over the last several weeks that he's an enticing option in 2 quarterback and super flex leagues. In 1 QB leagues, though, I think you got to try and go with someone that has shown more consistency with his upside this season than what Bryce Young has had. Tyler Shuck, kind of the same thing this week. He had 2 rushing touchdowns last week, and he has shown a solid floor since he took over as the starter. But once again, listing him as a fringe start because he's more of a 2 quarterback or a super flex option for me this week than he would be in a 1 QB league. Carolina is allowing the 8th fewest fantasy points per game, so Shuck's upside just is not that great. I like what I'm seeing at Cam Ward at the end of the season, and I think whoever they end up hiring as their new head coach could absolutely still get a star caliber NFL player that unfortunately did not have the guidance this season that he needed. As long as he continues to improve, that's great, but from a fantasy perspective, there hasn't been enough improvement for us to put him in our fantasy lineup. For Brock Purdy, though, Tennessee is allowing the 8th most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. So Purdy, for me, is a guy that we absolutely have to be starting this week. Indianapolis at Seattle, and if you're here trying to figure out whether or not you should play Phillip Rivers against a Seattle defense that has absolutely caused a ton of chaos over the last couple of weeks, then I can't help you. I can't. I am not going to be able to help you if you are here asking me if you should start Phillip Rivers this week. If you need to start Phillip Rivers, who is 44 years old and was hanging out with his grandkid last week, your fantasy season's been over for a while. Sam Darnold salvaged his week last week. To begin the game, it was not looking all that good. By the end of the game, he finished as the QB4. But unfortunately, over the last few weeks here, we're seeing some of the same issues creep up that we saw at the end of the last year from Minnesota. Sam Darnold, comeback player of the year, and it was even considered an MVP candidate at times last year. And then they got to the end of the season, and he just couldn't get it done. Hopefully, we don't see that same thing with Sam Darnold, but because we've seen games of QB 25 or lower in 3 of the last 5 weeks, Sam Darnold for me is not a safe start right now. Minnesota at Dallas. JJ McCarthy was very good last week, and now he's getting a Dallas defense that still allows the most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. I'm not going to come out here and say that JJ McCarthy is a must start. He's barely a fringe start for me. I'm not going to get excited over just 1 week, but playing that well definitely warrants a little bit of a discussion for playing JJ McCarthy, especially considering what he can do with his legs in 2 QB and super flex leagues. Dak Prescott, you're going to have him in your lineup. If you own Dak Prescott this week going up against Minnesota, who currently allows the 3rd fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks, you're thinking to yourself about a couple of things. Number 1, do I realistically have somebody to play that gives me a better chance at upside than what Dak Prescott does in his matchup? And number 2, if you do, is it worth it? Because more than likely in a 1 QB league, you might be able to stream somebody, but week 1 of the playoffs, I don't really know if I want to stream a quarterback over Dak Prescott given what he's done this season. Even in Tua's matchup this week, going up against the Pittsburgh Steelers on Monday Night Football, you gotta list him as a fringe start. The guy absolutely has potential to be inside the top 16 to 24 quarterbacks. Fringe start does not mean fringe start for 1 QB leagues. He still has 14 interceptions this season. I would try to go with somebody else that is a little bit more sturdy at the quarterback position. Last week was the first time Aaron Rodgers was a top 12 quarterback since all the way back in week 7, but he still continues to find himself as a top 24 quarterback. Now, back in week 13 against Buffalo, he was QB 31, and obviously he was injured the week before that. But for Aaron Rodgers, if you're going to keep giving us top 24 potential, then we're going to keep putting you into 2 QB and super flex leagues. I have him in a super flex league, and he's been a solid quarterback for me all season long. But Drake May is my QB1. Headliner Nation, there you have the breakdown for all the quarterbacks here in week 15, week 1 of the playoffs, and hopefully all the start and sit videos this week have at least got you headed in the right direction when it comes to setting your lineup. Now we wait on the rankings videos and the live shows to really tighten everything up and put in a fantasy lineup that's going to help us continue towards that fantasy championship. Hit the like button for me, subscribe to the channel, bell notification, hype the video, leave a comment, all of the good stuff that you normally would do to help support us here. But more importantly, stay safe and healthy, and I'll catch you on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.